All set. Okay. Hi, folks. It's Jim Garrettson at Wood Prairie Family Farm. It's just turned 1 o'clock. We'll wait a minute or two to let stragglers get in. Let's see, if you're already online, it would help us. We bought a new microphone to try to get around the audio problems that we had with the last webinar. So if you're on, it would do you'd be doing us a favor if you would use the chat box at the bottom of the screen and type in and say hi and let us know if the audio is working well this time. And for those of you that might have been on last time, you can tell us if it was better. But we have a decently pretty high quality microphone that we think is going to do the job, but we'd like to get some feedback from you to make sure. So if you are tuned in, just to let you know, you were tuned in to webinar number 3, the third in our winter series of Potato School webinars put on by Wood Prairie Farm in Bridgewater, Maine, in northern Maine. So we'll get going in a few minutes. Okay, Laura, thank you. Laura is telling us that the audio is working from her end. Thank you. Scott says it, yes. Notice that loud, abrupt noise, Scott, and we don't know what it was.
It's just some feedback.
Yeah, Frank says it was some feedback, so, okay. All right, thank you, Scott. And Teresa Martz, our friend down in the Mid-Atlantic, a lot more clear, but a lot of noise and echo. Is that anything that we know how to fix?
I don't know why there would be echo.
We are more farmers than audio engineers up here. Frank will do what he can figure out to try. Might it help if that was directly in front of me?
Yeah, try putting it right.
I'm gonna.
Oh, you're gonna hit.
What do you think?
I hit the keyboard.
Get it out of there. Okay, I'm repositioning the microphone. Now, Teresa, tell me if that's coming in better. That would help me. Thank you.
Much better.
Okay, good. I think they call that dead air. In Maine, we call that a time to contemplate. Okay, I guess folks are going to be coming in now, so we might as well get going. So welcome, everyone. It's a sunny, bright day in the northern part of the state of Maine. For about 3 hours a day, when I'm at my computer, I have to put up a sheet behind me because the glare on the few sunny days that we seem to get up here is such that I can't see my screen. So I've got my sheet up, and that tells me that we've got a sunny day out there. So we'll get on with this. Okay, and thank you, Beverly. She's saying that we've got better quality now. So we'll go ahead, and if you find that there's anything that you can think of that we could be doing better, feel free to let us know by chat, and we'll try to correct the process. So, Frank, remind me again how to turn slides ahead.
Use the mouse to click next and preview.
Okay. Well, that means I got to do that. Okay, I'm a slow learner. Okay, well, I do like maps, and here's another one that I thought would be quite interesting to get going on. And it does remind me that if you'd like to let us know where you were calling from, as you type in this chat, am I correct that everyone else is seeing the chat? Okay, as you type in your questions or your comments on the live chat, everyone else in this webinar can see that as well. So if you would do us the favor of tell us where you're listening from, I think that will be interesting to people that are also on this webinar. So what I want to tell you about is this map. I got it off of the NOAA weather site, and what it represents is deviation from norm. I can't read on my screen. I think it's going back about 30 or 40 years, but deviation from the norm.
71 to 2000.
Okay, 71 to 2000, so that would be 30 years. And this is deviation from, that was the established norm, and this is deviation since that baseline?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So baseline is 1971 to 2000, and this is a deviation in terms of moisture from that baseline. So the part of the country in the southwest, which is very light yellow to yellow, that indicates dryness, aberrational dryness from that 30-year norm. And then up here in Maine and in the Northeast and in the Ohio Valley and in the Pacific Northwest, I mean, look at northern Idaho and western Montana. Those are deviations where they are getting on an annual basis more rainfall. And interestingly enough, look down there at the southern tip of Florida. I see that's gray, and that's right at the very left end of the chart, which would indicate dry. Well, here's something interesting, and it has to do with potatoes, so I'm going to tell you about it. The state of Maine has owned for decades a farm in Homestead, Florida. It's on the mainland, but it is right down near the Florida Keys. It's in an agricultural area, and the reason the state of Maine owns that is where our Florida post-harvest test is conducted for the state of Maine. And the way seed certification works is we have a couple of field inspections by trained state inspectors over the summer checking our crop for freedom of disease. In order to enter seed into certification, one has to go through that testing process. But then in order to get seed tags and to be able to sell seed potatoes as Maine certified seed with those blue seed tags, we are required to collect a 400 tuber sample, which is about 50 pounds of potatoes if they're about the size of, let's say a golf ball. And we submit them to the state. They fill up a tractor trailer, and they drive that trailer load down to Homestead, Florida, to the main farm in November, and they plant the crop. And about this time of year, first couple of weeks of January is when they start to take field readings, and this is a pass-fail test, so that even if you had good, clean readings in the field in northern Maine, your sample that goes down there, if you've got over 5% disease, you'll be kicked out and you will not be able to sell your seed. The beauty of the design of this, it's an actual field test of the seed lot that is going to be sold to farmers and gardeners that will then be growing. So the beauty of this is you have a demonstration of how that seed lot is going to perform. And what's important is that some of the late season aphid spread that can transfer virus from into a clean field, you might get aphids that are blown in by the winds from the south. They have virus in their system. They land on a plant. They feed on it. They immediately transfer virus. Then they go to another plant. They transfer it there, and it is problematic. And this potato virus, as we've discussed in earlier webinars, can within one generation have a significant ability to hold back the vigor of a plant. And of course, when you hold back vigor, you're going to hold back yield. So it has been universally recognized for 100 years that what used to be called running out, what we now know as virus buildup in seed potatoes, and growing out from that, table stock potatoes, processed potatoes, or for that matter, seed potatoes, again, be multiplied out, that you can get quite a rapid buildup. The beauty of this design of a post-harvest field grow-out test is that a buyer gets a really good view of what that seed lot is how it's going to perform in the next year. So we've been sending samples down for about 30 years to Florida as part of the Maine seed certification program. There was an extraordinary event this year, and it had to do with rain. In the first 2 weeks of December, the Homestead area in Florida received 13 inches of rain. And this was at a time, if you imagine back, this would have been some weeks after the potatoes had been planted. Many of the potatoes hadn't yet come up. even though it's relatively sandy ground and well drained, when you get that kind of rain, and that's similar to the rains that we had here in 2011 and 2013, both of those years we had excessive rains, so extensive that we were declared in northern Maine federal disaster areas. Instead of getting the normal 15 to 18 inches per crop year, those years we got approximately 36 inches of rain, so 3 feet of rain during the cropping season. And even though our soils in northern Maine are legendary for being well drained, if you get twice as much water over the course of the season, it just can't drain out. And that's in fact what they had in Florida. So in the first couple of weeks they got 13 inches of rain. It had a severe damage to the germination, and in fact they had 1,100 seed lots of 400 tubers apiece. There was only a single seed lot of those 1,100 seed lots that came up to where there was more than 200 plants per sample. And like I said, we send down 400 tuber samples, so that would indicate a 50% emergence. There was only a single seed lot out of 1,100 seed lots sent from the state of Maine down to the farm owned by the state of Maine in Homestead, Florida. On that basis, for the first time in my experience, they abandoned the test. There is a provision so that if the germination is less than 200 plants, that they revert back to field readings, and that's the case of what's going on this year. Occasionally there's a variety like Red Cloud, one of the varieties that we grow that is extremely dormant. Dormancy is a resistance to sprouting, which if you're looking at it in the storage season, that kind of resistance is exactly what you want for long-term storage. It means that those potatoes are not going to sprout in storage. At the other end of the season, in the spring, when you're planting them, you're going to run into some problems in terms of very slow germination. When we do our green sprouting, and that was the subject of an earlier webinar, the Red Cloud and the other variety similar to it is Swedish Peanut. Those are the two most dormant varieties that we grow, and when we put them in the heat room to get them to break dormancy, we always put the Red Cloud and the Swedish Peanut right next to the source of heat, because we know that they're the ones most resistant. And in fact, a friend of mine, after we got growing Red Cloud maybe 20 years ago, another seed grower in town, a friend of ours, he decided to give Red Cloud a try. And I remember talking to him probably around the 15th or 20th of June, maybe a couple of weeks after planting was done, maybe 3 weeks after planting had completed. And my friend was ready to hook the disc onto his tractor and disc under the 2 or 3 acre field that he had of Red Cloud, because there wasn't a single plant up. On both sides of the Red Cloud, he had plants that were 6, 8, 10 inches high, and there wasn't any emergence at all. So I cautioned him. I said, be patient. They're going to come up. Once they come up, they grow like gangbusters. But because of that serious dormancy, which makes it a great keeping variety, they are slow. So he took my recommendation. They did come up, and he had a good crop out of them. But that's just one of the idiosyncrasies. So when we send Red Cloud down to Florida, that one variety more than any variety tends to have germination problems. It really doesn't want to grow in the fall. It is programmed like potatoes to, once the days lengthen and it warms up in the spring, they'll break dormancy and start growing, to try to take a very dormant variety like Red Cloud or like Swedish Peanut and to get it to wake up to do fall planting. That's a tough job. So sometimes it doesn't work, and they do treat these potatoes with chemicals to try to get them to break dormancy. And sometimes I think it's a matter of killing the patient in order to try to get it to break dormancy. So I'm looking over here, and I see we've got folks on the call from Virginia and Maryland, the foothills of North Carolina, Colorado Springs, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. So thanks everyone for letting us know where you're calling from. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so I wanted to let you know, give you an update on what we've been working on here. As I think we mentioned last time around, our son Caleb has put together a barn raiser crowdfund project, and this is designed to help with transition. After having farmed for 40 years, Megan and I have felt that it's the right time for us to hand the farm down to the kids, to let them start to make all the major decisions while we still are around to be able to help them and give them our experience and guidance. So in that process of handing the farm down to Caleb and his brother Peter and his sisters Sarah and Amy, we felt that it was good to try to get the kids off to a good start. And we've had some production problems with those very wet years, 2011 and 13, and we're still playing catch up from them, and that has prevented us from doing some of the things like we've needed to do, get a new web store together for years, and we just haven't had the wherewithal to do that. And now, because it's not a mobile-friendly web store, the search engines are penalizing us, and we know that we are losing sales from that. So that's just kind of a no-brainer that we need to get this set up. We've got a great company that we've been working with for 10 years that provides us with our software, and they need about $14,000 to be able to modify our web store to make it mobile friendly. And we think we're going to get a payback on that within 2 years. So it's something that we definitely want to do, and we just need to be able to get some funds ahead. So that is what this barn raiser project is all about. We're a little bit behind our target, but we're going strong. And that barn raiser project ends at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. So we're down to almost the last 24 hours. So if you're able to contribute to Caleb and the next generation, all you need to do is type in barn raiser, and the search engines will bring it up, and our campaign is being highlighted on their homepage. So you'll see this picture of from the National Geographic magazine of Megan with baby Caleb. That was the harvest of 1994, and that photograph appeared in the December 1995 issue. But you'll see that. You can click on it. You can go to the barn raiser campaign site that Caleb has set up. Yeah, okay, and Frank says that he will paste in the link in the chat session to make it easy for you to find. Okay, so that's one thing we're working on. There's a lot of work in communicating with folks, and we've had a lot of donations, and there's a big surge going on now. It reminds me of the public radio campaigns, and we're now in the last day, and the numbers are coming in. And here's the important thing: it's an all or nothing campaign. We've got a goal of $15,000, and we must meet that goal in order to hold on to the donations that have come in. So we've got one more day to get up there, and if you can donate, that's great. If you can share the link for our campaign with friends of yours, that's another way that you can help. We understand that not everyone has spare cash that they can donate, and as farmers, we understand that very well. So
it's cutting in and out. Someone said I'm going to up the gain of the mic.
Okay, Frank is doing a little bit of a modification on the microphone. Thank you, Laura, for letting us know. We've made a modification now, and if that works better, please let us know, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're winding down that barn raiser project. Now here's another thing, and this had to do with another form of excessive moisture, and that's rain. And Teresa, you and the others in the Mid-Atlantic, I imagine, are battening down the hatches for this snowstorm. Beginning Sunday, two farmers, well actually 4 farmers from Maine, including Elliot Coleman, the organizer, and his wife Barbara Damrosch, will be at Agrarian Elders Gathering number 2 at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur. So the other farmers from Maine going would be me. I was at the first one, and that photograph there was taken by a New York Times photographer that was covering that, and that was 2 years ago. The other farmer who will be coming for the first time will be what we are calling a younger. Instead of an elder, it's a younger, and that would be young farmer Carly Del Signor, of Tide Mill Farm. And these are very good friends of ours in down East Maine. Carly married into the Bell clan that has been farming on Tide Mill Farm for 9 generations since 1760, when their 15-year-old ancestor immigrated from Scotland. And they have a wonderful organic farm. They're focused on producing organic milk, organic dairy milk, and chickens. And they built a very massive processing facility so that they can get become very efficient at providing high quality, pasture-raised, certified organic chicken into the market throughout Maine, and if need be beyond, say, down to Boston. And they really do things right, and for anyone that knows them, they know that they are leaders within Maine organic farming, and through that leadership, they have been invited to participate. So the format is different this year. 2 years ago, there were 24 farmers. All of us were elders. All of us had a minimum of 30 years experience in farming organically. Some had 40 years, some had 50 years of experience. The thought this time around is that we need to start to hand down the knowledge that we have gained over our careers. So the format is different. This year there will be 12 elders, and we are bringing in 12 youngers. And these are people from all across the U.S. and Canada that demonstrate a capacity for leadership and have gotten some years of production under their belt, and it promises to be a very valuable experience. So we're going to be there for a week. Because of that storm, Carly and I are traveling together, and we were going to be flying through Philadelphia on Saturday, and given the forecast, we expect that airport to be shut down, and the airlines, in fact, have declared a snow emergency situation to where they're allowing us to switch our flight. So we're now going to drive down to Portland, fly out to Chicago, and then on to SFO in San Francisco, and avoid that storm system. We don't think we're going to get hit with it much in Maine. It's mainly going to hit mid-Atlantic as far as Boston and then go out to sea. So I've been on the phone in the last 24 hours. I've been on the phone for about 7 or 8 hours working with folks to try to get us correctly switched to the right flights. And it all worked out good. It took a while to do it, but in the end, we got our flights together. We're still on the same flight. We're not on different days, different airports, which was what we were getting stuck with. But it all worked out for the better. It just took a bit longer to do. So before I move from this slide, some people have laughed at me wondering what I'm snorting there. Well, what I'm snorting is the topsoil at the Esalen Gardens, which is incredibly rich. So this Esalen Institute has been there for 40 years. It does a great job in bringing together people of different disciplines and backgrounds and developing some progress. And you know, there's spiritual teachings and yoga and you name it, and they probably taught it at Esalen. So they have an organic garden there, and they grow some of the food that they feed to the folks that are attending. So Tom Willie, my friend there with the white beard, he and I go back 20 years. We first met one another in Washington, D.C. about 20 years ago at a press conference, which was called, we were part of a group of plaintiffs that was suing the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency over genetically engineered crops that we felt were going to contaminate organic crops. And we filed a lawsuit with IFOAM, International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, as the chief plaintiff. And we were some of the farmers that were involved. And at that time, if you think back, in the mid-90s, potatoes was one of the very first genetically engineered crops that went into commercialization. So anyway, I met Tom 20 years ago, and he was making the comment. He said, "Jim, this soil is good enough to eat." So challenging him on this, we picked up some soil and we were smelling it, and fresh, living, rich soil, high in organic matter, smells so good and so fragrant. It really is just this side of being good enough to eat. So that's what Tom was trying to prove to me, and he was absolutely right. That was wonderful soil, and it's an indication. Now, the Esalen Gardens, and that is spelled Esalen. I believe the name comes from, I think, the indigenous Indians. Historically, I think they were the Esalen Indians. And this is a beautiful place in Big Sur, literally overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The room that Tom and I shared had a window that if you opened the window, you could basically spit into the Pacific Ocean and the rocks below. It's been there. I can't imagine what its value would be if it ever went on the market now. But it's been around since probably the early 60s, and it's very beautiful. It is very quiet and isolated. You don't hear any traffic, and in fact, you can't even get a cell phone signal. And I believe that that is by design, because if you're going to go to a retreat, you don't want to have people constantly checking their cell phones and their iPhones for messages and texting. You want to break out of that pattern. So I believe that that's why they don't have a cell phone tower that works. So they do have, of all things, they've got a payphone there. I haven't seen a payphone in years except the one at Esalen. So we'll be heading out to that, and that is going to affect the scheduling for the next webinar, because I've got that a week's worth of Agrarian Elders, and then the following week we have the Organic Seed Growers Conference this year up in Corvallis, Oregon. So I'm staying behind in California and Oregon, attending that, and then I'm flying home. So by the close of this meeting, I'm going to come up and let you know when our next webinar is going to be. But that's the situation for the immediate future. Okay, on to the next slide. So that's a picture of the Agrarian Elders that met 2 years ago. I won't go through all of them, but our good friend Elliot Coleman, our good friend and seed customer, Elliot Coleman, is the one in the center row kneeling with a blue shirt on and a dark vest. And then all the way left there would be Barbara Damrosch, his wife, and she's got the red shirt on. And then you can see Tom Willey in the second row with that noticeable white beard. And next to him is my friend Susan Tyler in the red shirt, and she's from New Brunswick, Canada, and she and I traveled together to the last Agrarian Elders gathering. Now, the other half of elders that are not at this meeting, they will be meeting at Esalen in 2 years with another group of youngers. And then 4 years from now, both of those groups of youngers, they will meet together, and that will be the continuation of this Agrarian Elders tradition. So this is, for the dozen of us that will be meeting this week, we are sunsetting, and this will be our farewell to this process. And then if you want to see me, I'm the guy at the very back, at the very left. And standing next to me in that rainbow-colored scarf, that is Deborah Coons Garcia, who is a filmmaker who was making a film about that Agrarian Elders gathering. And she was the widow of musician Jerry Garcia. And she has a summer place here in Maine, so she gets back to Maine on a regular basis in the summer times anyway. And I talked to her at the National Heirloom Expo in Santa Rosa in September, where I was asked to give some talks on GMOs and protecting the organic community from corporate entry that has no respect for our traditions of honesty and purity. So Deborah showed a video she'd put together, which was kind of an introductory video, and what she told us was that she's envisioning a 6-part series. It's going to be kind of like a Ken Burns series, 6-part, that will be a documentary bringing out what were 35 hours of discussion. So everyone is looking forward to that. I don't know how long a process it takes. I'm a farmer. I'm not a filmmaker. It's not ready. I know she's working on it, and we'll be sure and let everybody know when it is available. So the last non-potato slide I wanted to show you is one of corn. That is one of the seed crops that we raise, organic corn, and this is a wonderful short season variety from the 1920s called Dormancy. It was bred in Canada at University of Guelph. It's a cross between Golden Bantam and Pickaninny. It's about a week earlier than Golden Bantam. It's cold soil tolerant. It's delicious yellow corn. It's got a relatively long picking window of 3, maybe 4 days, at least in Maine conditions with the heat that we get in Maine. And in that way, that's really pretty good for an open pollinated sweet corn. That's a pretty good picking window. And we think it's a great corn. We enjoy growing this. We grow a fair amount of it. We sell it in our own catalog. We also wholesale it to companies like Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds in Missouri, our friends down in Missouri. So that is one order that is virtually done. We've got women in the office today running the single cleaner, and they're going through the last step in removing any seed that's a little bit off shape or a little bit small, so that every seed in that comes out perfect. And we've done a germ test on this batch, and we're at 99% germination. So we buy our corn on the ear, and then we have a sheller, an old hand crank that we've hooked up to an electric motor that does a quick, gentle job of removing the kernels from the husk. And that ability of drying corn on the cob, that is the best way to raise corn seed. So if you're trying to raise some seed in your garden to keep some open pollinated corn seed back, let it dry down fully on the ear and then do the shelling. You'll get the best quality corn that way. Okay, to the subject at hand. The title of today's talk is Why All This Hullabaloo About Efficiency at Harvest. So we have been providing organic seed potatoes to home gardeners and market farmers for almost 30 years. Part of what we provide is hand-holding so that people are successful with our seed. For us, when we're raising seed, I don't want to get too corny about this, but we consider this kind of a sacred duty to do the best possible job that we can in raising that seed, because we have learned that the quality of seed, be it potatoes, be it corn, be it squash, tomatoes, what have you, there is a radical difference between high quality and mediocre quality. And most especially when we're selling to farmers, we know the economic challenges that family farmers face nowadays. We want our customers to succeed, whether they're home gardeners growing a crop or whether they're market farmers that are growing a crop as an important part of their livelihood for their family. So we do the best job that we can in growing the seed, and we also help our customers out so that when they have a problem, we present them with some ideas, and maybe what our experience has told us can help us, or maybe what our neighbors' experience can tell us. One of the benefits of being in Aroostook County is that there's as much experience here as anywhere in the United States or probably in Canada. Potatoes have been grown in northern Maine since the first century of the 1800s. Joseph Holton in Holton, 25 miles south, settled that. What was that, Frank? Was that 1803 or 1807 that they settled Holton? Well, the first thing he drew, the first year he grew blue-nosed potatoes on some ground that he had cleared the trees off of. Potatoes generate a tremendous amount of calories per acre, and whether you're a pioneer or whether you're in a developing or a developed country, you can get a tremendous amount of calories to sustain yourself and your family off a small amount of ground. So potatoes is something that there's a lot of experience up here, and we're happy to share that experience. And really, that's the whole philosophy behind having these potato webinars. In the 40 years we've been growing potatoes, we've gained an understanding of it. We continue to be fascinated by potatoes. We're fascinated by potato history. And to those of you that share that fascination, we're happy to share what we've learned about it. So this slide here is how we're going to begin. And the reason I'm picking harvest, it's really a pretty simple concept. Typically it takes about a ton of potatoes to plant an acre. So assuming that everything goes right, in the fall you're going to get a 10x increase. So that ton of seed is going to be 10 tons or 20,000 pounds of a harvest in the fall. That's if everything goes right. Sometimes when things go really right, you might get 25,000 pounds, 30,000 pounds, 35,000 pounds or more. But just for the sake of this argument, let's call it a 10x increase. If you're relatively inefficient in the spring with your planting, that inefficiency is not going to hurt you as much because you're only lugging around a ton, 2,000 pounds. And we planted back when we got our start, we were tuber unit planting 2.5 acres by hand, a special type of planting technique to where you're planting the mother tubers, all the pieces from the same mother tuber, you're planting those consecutively to make roguing for virus plants that much easier to do. And it's an old-time method. I think we're probably now the only ones left in the state of Maine that does this, but we've done this for decades. And it's a very good way. It's one of the advantages that a farm of our modest scale can produce high-quality seed that is largely free, completely free of virus. So we know how much effort it is lugging around that ton of seed per acre. So I don't want to be dismissive that that's not an amount of work, but imagine if you've got 10 times that weight to handle come harvest. If you're going to be inefficient in the spring at planting. If you're going to be serious in raising potatoes, be serious and be efficient at harvest, because you've got so much more weight to deal with. And potatoes, if you're a lettuce grower and you're growing loose leaf or small greens or head lettuce, you're moving around boxes of lettuce that you got to chain down to keep from floating away. When you're talking about potatoes, a 1 bushel box is going to be 50 pounds. When you're getting a yield of 20,000 pounds per acre, you're talking a lot of weight. So you want to be efficient. You want to move those potatoes as little as you can so that you don't damage them, and you do want to save your back. So that's where some kind of mechanization comes along and is really valuable. What's very common for organic farmers that are starting out is they may start out with a large garden, and then over time it expands to 1/4 of an acre and then maybe even 1/2 of an acre. And very often they're still using the same techniques that were appropriate on that 1/10 of an acre scale, and it's starting to lose its luster when it's up to 1/4 and 1/2 acre. So if you're out there with a shovel trying to dig up 1/4 acre of potatoes, you're going to burn out on it. That's my opinion. And you need to have some kind of mechanization. And it doesn't have to be as fancy as the single row Hoover harvester, though in my opinion, if you're going to be serious about potatoes, this is the kind of step up that you need to get to. But if you had some kind of a spade, and if you were to go online, you can, I've found, this is my discovery, which probably everyone else has known about for 10 years, but if you want to Google potato digger or potato harvester, and I'll describe the difference in a bit, plus, and then plus sign, and then photo, you can go online, and it's incredible how many photographs come up, and you can really educate yourself on what is out there. And we've had our techniques down for many years, and I see that they're There's an entrepreneurial spirit in this country, and there are new solutions that are all based on these same 100-year-old designs, but refinements. For example, hooking up to the three-point hitch on a tractor, refinements that would be an improvement over this. But the basic principle, that's the point of this slide, the basic principle in harvesting potatoes has not changed for, I would say, at least 125 years. This Hoover digger, you can see that there's a seat on the top and there's a hand brake. So it was designed for the farmer to sit on the seat. The pole in front would go between a team of horses, so this would be pulled by 2 horses. That hand brake would adjust the depth by which that pointed thing, that's called a spade, and with the hand brake there, that would raise and lower the spade so that you would make sure that you would get adequately underneath the tubers so that you're not damaging them. But you would not want to be so deep into the ground that you're pulling up excessive dirt that would then plug up the digger. So how this works is, if you look, those are called lags, and it's like a conveyor belt made of individual, nowadays heat-treated metal that's very rugged. And the other name for it is called hook chain. So it's a long lag, approximately 22, 23 inches long, and then on both ends you've got what's called a hook. It would be a U-shaped design, and these lags then hook together similar to a conveyor chain, or similar to a conveyor belt. So the design is that the spade lifts up the entire row, and in a country like Maine, that row is going to be composed of dirt, potatoes, and rocks. The dirt is shaken through the lags. That goes back to the ground, and then what conveys back and is gently dropped off the backside would be a combination, in northern Maine's case, of potatoes and rocks. Now, in order to shake the dirt through, there are what are called shakers, and these are oblong shaped metal apparatus that are bolted on, and as the lag bed moves back, these shakers are shaking the lag bed up and down, and it shakes the dirt through very well, especially if the dirt is dry to moderately dry. It does a very good job. This is called a ground drive powered implement, and if you look at those big wheels, those metal paddles on that, those are on to give traction to the wheels so that they dig into the soil and they're not going to slip, even if you're in wet conditions with mud going over the lags. Those are going to dig in under the weight of the machine. It's a good design. However, as this was the first mechanization of potato harvesting, and again, this probably came out in the late 1800s. The way this is designed, you only have one speed. You've got ground speed, which is the speed at which the horses walk, and that is in direct relation to the bed speed. If the horses walk faster, then the bed speed turns, then the wheels turn faster, then the lag bed turns faster. If the horses walk slower, the converse is true. The problem, that'll work good if you've got decent soil conditions, if you don't have too much moisture in that soil. But imagine a wet fall to where you're digging up and you've got twice as much weight because that soil is really loaded with water. That means the shakers are not going to do nearly as good a job of shaking the dirt through, so you're going to be carrying more of a load of dirt back. And, actually in bad conditions, you could actually reap the potatoes that you've just dug up. So that was an inherent limitation of this design of a ground drive rig, to where you had no ability to change that. Now, farmers are the most ingenious people on the planet. What eventually transpired, the first stage of changing this was to change from a ground drive unit to where they would have a mounted gasoline engine that would be independent, and it would have a clutch, and you could have different speeds on that clutch. That would allow you to maintain uniform ground speed, and by shifting a lever, you could change the bed speed. So this divorced the bed speed away from the ground speed, and it became an important improvement in terms of improving the whole design of this. If you were in wet conditions, you would speed up the lag bed speed. It would more violently shake the lags with those shakers, and it would start to toss down dirt that was wetter. This isn't a problem if you've got dry soil, but if you're in the north where you grow potatoes, or if you're having a tendency of wet conditions at harvest, switching over to a gasoline engine was a major improvement. Well, gasoline engines can be stubborn and hard to run, so sometimes they wouldn't start at all. The next step in the progression was what's in my next slide. And this is a PTO-powered 2-row John Deere digger. We've got a couple of these. You can see it's got 2 sets of lags. We have since converted our hook chain over to belted lags, which is the kind of the modern way of doing it. But again, the principle is the same. It hasn't changed for most of 100 years. The very first 2-row diggers were simply 2 1-row diggers bolted together, and I know this for a fact because my old neighbor Earl McKinnon on our road, he was born in 1904, on his rock pile and back, he had an old 2-row digger. It had a little bit of yellow paint left on it, not very much, but a little to indicate that it had been yellow originally. And what was obvious is they simply, the manufacturer simply took 2 of their 1-row planters, and with minor modification, they literally bolted them together. It was an odd-looking machine now that we've seen modern ones, but that was the first way that they said, hey, with 1 pass, instead of digging 1 row, you can dig 2 rows. That means you've got one, what are called the digger man. The digger man is who digs the potatoes. So on that tractor, that picture was probably taken 20, 25 years ago. So that's me driving that. I don't have white in my beard, or doesn't look like any, but certainly not the white that I've got in my beard now. So we're digging 2 rows at a time. So the digger man, you're covering twice as much ground for the same amount of effort. It's a good improvement. With that PTO, which is called power takeoff, which is a shaft which comes out from the directly from the engine, and it powers implements. That allows one to change the ground speed to bed speed, so that if you're in tough, muddy conditions, you can pull the throttle up high so your engine RPMs are up. You can lower your gear so that, say, if you've been going in 2nd gear, you go it down into 1st gear. So your ground travel is slow, your engine idle is very high, the PTO shaft is spinning that much faster, it's turning the lags faster, and then there are adjustments on the shakers, and those shakers can do a pretty radical job of shaking dirt through. Anyway, that was the improvement, and that is how we raised and dug potatoes until about 10 years ago, when we shifted over to buying the first Yuko harvester imported into the United States. It was made in Finland, and here you can see that's our daughters Amy and Sarah on the left, and Michelle and Justin is the tall guy in the back. Justin is on the hedgehog harvester, or the hedgehog separator, and that function it's a pretty remarkable invention, but it does a very good job of separating potatoes from rocks. And the potatoes comes up that what's called a secondary bed. On the left side, those are potatoes. On the right side, you can see a brown hand there with a rock, and the rocks go on that side. So what the worker's job on the secondary is to take the potatoes that mistakenly were placed in the rock conveyor, to put them on the other side, and then any rocks on the potato side, that goes there. So that's what they're constantly doing, is putting things right, that the machine does it 90% right, and their job is to get that last 10%. So that lag bed on that Hoover single digger, they never called it a primary, it was the lag bed. Well, once they came up with more sophisticated harvesters, and that's the difference, a digger digs up the hill of potatoes, lays the tubers back on the soil, then you come back with buckets or baskets and you pick them up. A harvester picks up the tubers, separates it from the rocks, and then puts it into some kind of a conveyance, a container. In our case, we use 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot pallet boxes. Most farmers now use boom conveyors, and they go into bulk body trucks that 30 years ago held 100 barrels or 8 tons. Nowadays, most trucks are probably carrying 200 to 300 barrels. Everything has gotten bigger, higher capacity, trying to cut down the labor. So a newer style harvester has a primary, which is the same as the lag bed on the Hoover digger, and then it's got a secondary at perpendicular to the primary, and that's where the workers do the final separation before it goes into its container. That's the level of mechanization that we're at, but I can tell you that potatoes really are a crop that lends itself to high mechanization. And I'm going to start to show you that. All right, well, looks like we've got a technical problem. Looks like we're missing some of those slides. What we'll do, let's see. We'll see if we can somehow modify this YouTube. When we put it up on YouTube, we'll insert these slides that we had picked out, but for some reason they were dropped and didn't end up in the slideshow. But what I was going to show you was some of the modern potato harvesters, some that you would see right here in Aroostook County and other major potato growing areas that are still pulled by tractors. And then the final slide was going to be of self-propelled, steerable potato harvesters that have their own engine, and the driver sits in there and they've got big tires up front. I have not seen any of those here. I've seen them in the potato magazines. I've seen them online, but I haven't seen any in Aroostook County. These harvesters have gotten really expensive. I know a farmer locally that his pattern is to buy a new harvester every 2 years. The harvester costs about $400,000. So every 2 years, he trades in the last model, gets the new harvester, and so every year, he's basically getting 2 years experience with the harvester, and then ingenuity being what it is, there's improvement every year with the, some tweaking that makes the newer harvesters that much better. They've got a lot of electronic functions now, but this is a farmer that is on a scale, to my knowledge, of about 800 acres of table stock. So somebody that has a calculator can figure that out. If you're buying say you're buying a $400,000 harvester every 2 years, say you're getting a trade-in value of $100,000 on that harvester, so you've got a net cost of $300,000 spread out over 2 years. You've got $150,000 simply for the cost of the machinery for harvesting, and spread that over 2 years worth of potatoes at 800 acres a year is 1,600 acres. Somebody that's quick with math or has a calculator can figure that out, but it's a significant cost, and there's just fewer and fewer farmers that are capable of affording that kind of expense. But that's kind of the direction of all of agriculture, is that everything is getting concentrated and larger, and fewer family scale farmers have access to the capital required. And potatoes is a little bit of an unusual crop, because among the vegetable crops, it is something that is heavily oriented towards industrialization, and farms get bigger and bigger. And what I see, the sad ramifications of that, is that I see my neighbors going out of business, that they stop farming because they can't keep up. The margins are so low in potato production that the idea is you got to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and in the end you're going to have only a handful of farmers left that are growing these massive acreages. And then what if you get that 13 inches of rain like they got in Florida? What if you get that in mid-September right before potato harvest? It doesn't sound to me like this is enhancing food security. So I see I've talked for quite a bit. I did want to remind you that I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. At any time during this webinar or any webinar, please feel free to type in your question with the chat. If anyone's been saving up a question in the remaining minutes now, that's what I want to be able to do, is to answer your questions. So take a minute and let us know if there's anything that I could make more clear, or like that. And while you're doing that, I'm going to get my calendar and see if I was smart enough to figure out ahead of time when we're going to have our next webinar. Oh, I did. Okay. Our next webinar is going to be after I get back from that Organic Seed Growers Conference. It's going to be on Thursday, February 11th. We will be sure everybody that's on this webinar or who has attended prior webinars, they'll be on our list, and we'll be sure and let you know. Once we complete this webinar, as we've done in the past, Frank will take this and turn it into a YouTube video. We'll post that on YouTube, and we will send you an email, so you've got that link. So if you want to either watch this webinar again or share it with somebody else, you'll have that ability. And I'll see if we can figure out how to get those slides put in so that, yeah, Frank is nodding. Okay, Frank is saying he can insert them, so that'll be even more reason for you to watch it a second time. It's pretty amazing how big these harvesters have become. But here's one thing I wanted to mention. One of the big revolutions that has come along in potato harvesting is actually not the big, flashy, expensive harvesters. It's a second machine called a windrower. And back in the mid-70s, when I got my start, the biggest potato farm in our town, Bridgewater, was about 250, maybe 300 acres. They had 3 harvesters that would dig 2 rows at a time, and it took us about 3.5 weeks with 3 harvesters to harvest that kind of acreage. The invention that came in, I suppose, probably in the early 1980s, are called windrowers. And what these machines do, they're again based on this lag concept. They would dig up first, you'd have a 2-row windrower, and they would dig up 2 rows, and then that secondary lag bed that goes sideways, that would be modified, and that would extend out, and that would dump the 2 rows that are just being dug up. That would dump them between 2 existing rows, so that when that same harvester came through digging 2 rows, it was actually digging 4 rows, because 2 rows worth of potatoes were dumped between the 2 rows. It was a pretty slick invention. I've always been skeptical about when you handle potatoes that much, don't they get beat up and banged? And I'm told that they don't, so I don't have that experience. I don't run windrowers during the fall. We're busy on our farm. But there have been testing done, and the potatoes, it does seem to be working well. Farmers are not content with just going with, the first invention. They want to keep refining it. So pretty quick, you started to see, after the 2-row harvesters, you would have 2-row harvesters dump left, and then a 2-row harvester dump right. So you would be able to have 2 different tractors pulling 2 different windrowers that would dump potatoes. So when that harvester came through digging 2 rows, no longer would it be digging just the 2 rows, it would be digging 6 rows, because the 2 rows on either side were then windrowed and put in that center row. So then that harvester was digging 6 rows at a time. And some of my friends in town, that's what they're doing, is digging 6 rows at a time, especially a seed grower where you've got a lot of different varieties, a lot of different seed lots. If you've got a 20-acre field and it's all one variety, Russet Burbank going up to the French fry factory, you can dig a lot more rows. You don't have to keep them straight. But if you're a seed grower, you've got a lot of rows, a lot of varieties, a lot of seed lots. it makes sense to not get too carried away. But some of these larger process growers are now, it's now, I would say the norm now is to have 4-row windrowers. So they'll be dumping in, and some of the biggest, newest harvesters now are 4-row harvesters. So they're digging 4 rows at a time. So then you have a 4-row windrower, and now digging or laying potatoes in. So if you have 2 4-row windrowers, one dumping left, one dumping right, you can, with a 4-row harvester, go through and harvest 12 rows at a time. So just imagine that difference. Starting out with that Hoover digger, one man sitting on that, a pair of horses, digging up 1 row at a time that pickers would come by hand with baskets and barrels and get out of the field. Nowadays, it's not uncommon at all for an operation to be digging 10, 12, even more rows at a time with 1 pass of a very expensive harvester dumping into a bulk body truck that now may haul up to 40,000 pounds of potatoes at a time. It is absolutely a major revolution that's been going on, but I credit the revolution mostly kind of undersung hero, the windrower. I think that is the thing that really made the change. I mean, it's not like they're digging 12. It's not like they have a 12-row harvester, but the windrows have allowed the harvester to cover much more acreage without increasing the number of times it needs to go across the field. So that's been the big change in potatoes. And the idea on every scale is to be efficient at harvest, because if you're efficient at harvest, you're going to make more money and you're going to wear your back out less. So that same principle has been in place for 125 years, and here we are today. So we're now up to 2 o'clock. I'll make a last call. If anyone has any questions, please submit them by the chat. Otherwise, we'll wind this down. I'll remind you that our next webinar is going to be next month in February on Thursday, same time, same place, Thursday, 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern, which is 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific, on Thursday, February 11th. And we will be getting out to everyone that was tuned in here, and we'll give you the link to register at the new webinar number 4. We'll give you the link to view the past webinars that we put on, including this one today. Okay, well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Oh, here, Arthur, okay, we've got a question here. Let me do that. Let me read this. Okay, the question from Arthur is, have you used the plastic-lined trench to cast the first of the walking movement of potato beetles, and does it work? Well, yes, we have. Does it work? I'm not sure. It's a lot of effort at a busy time of year, but what Arthur is talking about is digging a trench, a V-shaped trench, usually on the south side of the field. Most Colorado potato beetles that go to hibernate in the winter, they migrate southward out of the field. Maybe they're hoping to get to Florida. But they head to the nearest woods, usually to the south, sometimes to the west. So the idea is, and this is what we did at Jeepers, I haven't thought of this for most of 20 years, but it was 25 years ago that we did this following a design that some of the fellows developed down in Long Island, New York. You dig a deep V trench, at least a foot deep, with, say, a spade on a tractor, or what are called spades, but a hilling spade for hilling potatoes. And then you come back with black plastic mulch, and you lay that in the trench, and then you cover the edges. And then what happens in the field situation is that black plastic loads up with a fine layer or patina of dust. And the Colorado potato beetle, migrating from the woods on the south, they come up to this and they look at the top and think, what is this? And then all of a sudden they tumble and they roll down to the bottom. And then as they try to get out, they can't get out. That little fine layer of dust
prevents them from getting traction and getting out. Now, Colorados can fly, but they can't fly until the air temperature is 75 degrees. So you do have to put this into the field early. You know, if it's after it's warmed up to where it's over 75 degrees, they're going to fly over your trap, so it's not going to be effective. As time goes by, you get rain. The rain tends to accumulate in the V bottom of that plastic. And those little buggers, they fall in there and they drown before they can get out. You know, they try to get out, they can't get out, they get tired, they end up drowning. So, is it effective? In our experience, it wasn't that effective. We didn't catch that many. I've heard of accounts, read of accounts to where people are collecting thousands of potato bugs. That wasn't our experience. It is a fair amount of effort to do, and it's a very busy time of year. So we did it for probably, I would guess, 3 years, and decided that it wasn't worth the effort and that we had other better controls. So now, 20 years later, we've got some, you know, pretty serious potato bug pressures. I haven't even thought about going back to that. We didn't have great success. Others might. I wouldn't be dismissive of it, but what if they want to come in from the west where you're turning your tractor in the headlands? You know, there's no practical way to put a barrier there. So I think it was a novel idea. I didn't see that it worked that well, so that's why we gave it up. So thank you for that question, Arthur. Teresa, she's got a question. Oh, okay. Teresa's just wishing us a safe journey to California. Well, thank you, Teresa. We've got a lot to do between the time that we take off, but thank you very much. I appreciate your good thoughts. Beverly is asking, how do potatoes damage the plants? Okay. Well, potato bugs damage the plants by eating the above ground plant. The fact is, even though the adults that you see, the ones that lay eggs, and every adult female is capable of laying 400 eggs over its lifetime, that's why if you can squish an adult and it happens to be a female, you're saving yourself the headache down the line. And here's the fact, even though the adults are more visible, it is that larva that is doing most of the damage eating the plants. So the female lays its eggs underneath on the underside of a leaf. Once that hatch goes on, the larvae grow at a pretty fast rate. It's temperature dependent. I can tell you that in 1991 was a hot drought spring. I can picture potatoes in one field, and it got hot in a hurry, and those Colorados grew incredibly fast. We had been given some biological organic material called Trident, which I believe the guys had actually let it get frozen and it was killed. I don't think it did a thing. So we sprayed it thinking that it would do the job we needed, and those bugs just went wild. And it was so hot, they went from what's called first instar to fourth instar in 3 days. And first instar is once they've hatched, you know, they're the size of the head of a pin, and fourth instar is basically almost the size of an adult. They went from that size in 3 days in 72 hours. The next year, 1992 was a wet, cold spring, never warmed up. It took 3 weeks for those Colorados to go from hatch to fourth instar. So that's your range, 3 days to 21 days. Same stage, entirely temperature dependent. The hotter it is, the quicker they'll mature. It is those young larvae growing that have a voracious appetite, and there's a lot of them. That is what does the damage. And we have seen fields, I have seen fields with my own eyes that have not been adequately controlled, and those Colorados can eat the plant right back to the stem. They could cause, under perfect storm conditions, they could cause a total crop failure if things are out of balance, if you're not rotating properly. You know, if you want to grow potatoes after potatoes, there's nothing the Colorados love more, because there is a certain number of them that will overwinter at the base of the plant the previous year, and they come up and there's good eating right there, and they lay their eggs, and it's a real problem. But that is the damage. It's defoliation caused by potato bugs that are eating the leaves, and it's the larva that does most of that damage. So don't be fooled. The adults, you want to get rid of them, especially the females that are going to lay eggs, but it is the larva that is going to eat you out of house and home. Okay, Arthur is making a comment. I picked potato beetles off of plants and dropped them in water a couple of years ago. They sank. Next day, I found them still in the bottom of the water can. They were alive and well, so I dumped them into the chicken yard, and the chickens had absolutely no interest. Arthur, we've done the same things. I don't know what it is. I would guess that if you're a Colorado potato beetle that has co-evolved with a deadly plant in the nightshade family for tens of thousands of years, you were probably a pretty bitter-tasting bug, and even chickens have some self-respect, and they are not going to lower themselves to eating a bitter, low-life Colorado potato beetle. So we've had the same experience. The fact that they did not drown is news to me, but given the Superman status of Colorado potato beetle, I'm not surprised. They are tough. I'll tell you, I've never found a beetle resistant to my squishing them between my thumb and forefinger, and the day that they get resistant, I'm going to start to grow turnips or something besides potatoes. But that's one way. There's no insecticide, there's no spray drift, there's no damaging beneficials. You are capturing the culprit, and you are meting out swift justice. And if it's a female, you're getting rid of the potential of 400 eggs, 400 larvae down the line, and having to squish 400. So if you can get those females early on, be it a trap on the south side of the field or by some other technique, you can do that. But they are tough, and that's just what we've got to deal with. But we're tougher, and we're ingenious, and we're going to win. And I do find that the stronger the plant, if you've got good seed, you've got well-fertilized fields, you've got adequate moisture, once those green-shrouded potatoes come out of the ground, they are like a rocket, and they grow fast. And potato bugs, if you've got everything going right, potato bugs, you can outgrow a lot of your trouble just with doing everything right. Good seed, good fertility, good soil, adequate moisture. Potato bugs are at a disadvantage. And then even if you do that, picking off, in my opinion, and in my firsthand experience, I believe that picking potato bugs is the best way to control potato bugs if you have a scale of, say, 500 row feet or less. And, once you're getting into farming and you've got more than that, it probably, I would say, above 500 row feet in my experience, and I've done it, so I'm speaking from direct experience, back when potato bugs were heavy, in heavy concentrations. I'd say over 500 feet, then you got to figure out some kind of a strategy, because I think you won't have enough time if you're a busy farmer squishing bugs. That's about the borderline. If you're going 100 feet, 200 feet, I would definitely recommend going out 2 to 3 times a week, squishing those bugs, and you can grow a beautiful crop without having to spray anything for Colorado potato beetle. So last call if there's any more questions. If not, we're going to sign off. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I enjoy talking about potatoes, and if you enjoy listening to an old guy talk, we'll do this again. So I guess with that, we'll tune out. We'll sign off. Hope to see you again on Thursday, February 11th, 2016. We will be sending out the link to this as we post it. Thank you, Teresa. Some days I feel older than other days. And thanks for joining us, and please join us again. So long.
session.
Oh.